Symbolically, 40 years represents a generation. So now we're going to see some of the older ones die out, new ones coming in, and the cycle continues. They have apostasy in the land. And what will that lead them into? Servitude. So from verse 1 of chapter 6, then the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord. So the Lord delivered them into the hand of Midian for 7 years. And the hand of Midian prevailed against Israel. Because of the Midianites, the children of Israel made for themselves the dens, the caves, and the strongholds which are in the mountains. So it was, whenever Israel had sown, Midianites would come up. Also, Amalekites and the people of the east would come up against them. Then they would encamp against them and destroy the produce of the earth as far as Gaza, and leave no sustenance for Israel, neither sheep nor ox nor donkey. For they would come up with their livestock and their tents, coming as numerous as locusts. Both they and their camels were without number, and they would enter the land to destroy it. So Israel was greatly impoverished because of the Midianites, and the children of Israel cried out to the Lord. After the 40 years of rest that Israel experienced under the hand of Deborah, they go back into idolatry, and they did evil in the sight of the Lord. As a result, God allowed the Midianites to oppress them for 7 years. Now, this oppression was quite an oppression, to the point where the Israelites acted like fugitives in their own land. They carved out dens and caves and strongholds in the mountains to hide from the Midianites, and they were impoverished because when they would plant and their harvest would come in, the Midianites would come down and wreak havoc in their fields and leave nothing for the people to eat and also for the animals to eat. And God hears the cries of the Israelites. Now, it takes 7 years for them to cry out to him, but he hears them and he answers by releasing a prophet to them to remind them of the reason why they're experiencing this oppression, that they have not obeyed the Lord, that they have not listened to his voice, and that they have gone into idolatry. And so God sends this prophet to them, and he reminds them that I am the Lord your God. Do not fear the gods of the Amorites, and do not bow down to them. You dwell in their land, but do not bow down to them. And then after that prophet comes, we read of the next judge that is going to arise in Israel. And that judge is Gideon. Now, if you are a student of the Bible already, you would have most likely heard of the name of Gideon. But not many people know that Gideon was not just a mighty man, but he was actually a judge in Israel. So let's read from verse 11. Now the angel of the Lord came and sat under the terebinth tree, which was in Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, while his son Gideon threshed wheat in the winepress in order to hide it from the Midianites. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, The Lord is with you, you mighty man of valor. Gideon said to him, O my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us? And where are all his miracles which our fathers told us about, saying, Did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord has forsaken us and delivered us into the hands of the Midianites. Then the Lord turned to him and said, Go in this might of yours, and you shall save Israel from the hand of the Midianites. Have I not sent you? So he said to him, O my Lord, how can I save Israel? Indeed, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house. And the Lord said to him, Surely I will be with you, and you shall defeat the Midianites as one man. So the angel of the Lord comes to Gideon, and we recognize this as what we call a theophany, meaning an appearance of Jesus Christ in the Old Testament, in human form, but this is before his incarnation we see in the New Testament. He has this encounter with the angel, and interestingly, he talks about the miracles that his fathers have told him about. So that means Gideon had heard about the great works of God in the past. He had heard of how God had delivered them, but he was wondering why God wasn't doing it now. And so he's probably thinking that the problem is God. God has forsaken us, God has forgotten his covenant, but he's going to find out that the problem is not with God, the problem is with Israel and how Israel has forsaken God. So the angel tells Gideon that he has to go forth in strength because he's a mighty man of valor. Gideon's like, "Are you sure it's me?" Right? I don't feel that way. But that doesn't stop God. God already knew all of that when he came to Gideon in the first place. Even for your life, when God instructs you to do certain things and he puts you on certain platforms, not when you're seeking it for yourself, but when God is doing it in and through you, he has already taken into consideration every reason that you could give him as why you should not be the person to do it or to go to that place or stand on that platform. God already knows, right? So God's assurance to Gideon is his assurance to us. Listen, I'm here. I got you, right? I am with you. And as we become more confident in God, we will be more equipped to do what he has asked us to do. But Gideon is not so convinced, and he asks the Lord to show him a sign that it is actually the Lord who is speaking with him. And it's not wrong for Gideon to ask for a sign because sometimes when you need clarity, you need some certainty as to the instruction that God is giving you, you're making sure that it's God and it's not your emotion and it's not, the culture saying it in your heart, then it's okay to ask the Lord to confirm it. Lord, just make it clear to me so that I can obey you. You're not doing it because you want to put God on the spot. You're doing it because you really want to follow through with what God has asked you to do and to be obedient to him, but you're just not sure of what he's saying in this moment. And so God did clarify it. God did confirm it with a sign. And Gideon told the angel of the Lord to stay where he was. He went in and he prepared a young goat and unleavened bread from flour. And he put the meat in a basket. He put the broth in a pot. And he brought them out to the angel of the Lord who's sitting under the tree. And the angel of the Lord says to him, "Take the meat and the unleavened bread and lay them on this rock and pour out the broth." And Gideon does that. And then the angel of the Lord uses the staff that he has and he puts it out and he touches the meat and touches the bread, and fire comes out of the rock and consumes the meat and the unleavened bread. So basically consumes the sacrifice. And then the angel of the Lord departs. Okay. So he gave him a sign that this is really God speaking to you. And as we continue to read, we see that Gideon perceives that this is the angel of the Lord. After Gideon perceives that this is really God speaking to him, he builds an altar there to the Lord, and he does this as an act of worship, an act of consecration and surrender to God, and he calls this place Jehovah Shalom. The Lord is peace. So we're going to continue on in this chapter to Gideon's ministry. How does it start? After he has this encounter with the angel, what does he do next? Well, from verse 25, we read, "Now it came to pass the same night that the Lord said to him, Take your father's young bull, the second bull of 7 years old, and tear down the altar of Baal that your father has, and cut down the wooden image that is beside it, and build an altar to the Lord your God on top of this rock in the proper arrangement. And take the second bull and offer a burnt sacrifice with the wood of the image which you shall cut down." So Gideon took 10 men from among his servants and did as the Lord had said to him. But because he feared his father's household and the men of the city too much to do it by day, he did it by night. Now, you have to remember, at that time, the city was doing what is evil in the sight of God. So their idols were important to them. So I can understand to a point Gideon's fear of doing this because he's basically interfering with the God that the city is now worshiping. Now, in the morning, when the community wakes up and the men of the city come and they see that their altar of Baal is torn down and that the wooden image that was beside it was cut down, and there is a bull offering on the altar that has been built, they want to know who has done this. And it's reported that Gideon, the son of Joash, has done this thing, right? They don't have a hard time to figure out who has done this, who is behind this act. And they say to Joash, Gideon's father, to bring out your son that he may die because he has torn down the altar of Baal. But Gideon's father intervenes and he says, "Would you plead for Baal? If Baal is a god, then let him answer for himself." But he didn't give up his son Gideon to them. So let me continue on from verse 33. Then all the Midianites and the Amalekites, the people of the east, gathered together, and they crossed over and encamped in the valley of Jezreel. But the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon. Then he blew the trumpet, and the Abiezrites gathered behind him, and he sent messengers throughout all Manasseh, who also gathered behind him. He also sent messengers to Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali, and they came up to meet them. So after Gideon tears down the altar to the idol Baal, now he is gathering his army. And he calls from men from the different tribes, and they actually come and rally behind him. And it's important that to note that the scripture says that the Spirit came upon Gideon. So he has the divine empowerment from God. So he has this great army, and it's about 32,000 men who come to follow him into battle. As he's going to go into battle up against his enemies, he asks God for another sign. Now remember, God had already given him a sign with the meat and the bread and the fire from the rock. But now Gideon asks for what we call a fleece, for God to confirm to him the word that he had given him. Gideon says, "If you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said, look, I shall put a fleece of wool on the threshing floor. And if there is dew on the fleece only, and it is dry on all the ground, then I shall know that you shall save Israel by my hand, as you have said." And so it was. Usually when you wake up in the morning, there's dew all on the ground. So it doesn't really make sense for one thing to have dew on it and not the other. So this was definitely a miracle that Gideon was asking for. And when he woke up the next day, everything else was dry and the fleece was wet with the dew. Then he goes back to God and he says, "Don't be angry with me, please confirm it once again. Now let's do it the reverse. I'm going to put out the fleece, but let the fleece be dry and let the ground be wet with the dew." And God did that for him that night. So God has shown Gideon 3 times that it is him who is speaking to him and that he can go in his strength. We see in the life of Gideon that Gideon's faith was imperfect and that he needed reassurance to do what God had asked him to do. Now, God still used Gideon in a mighty way, but we can learn from Gideon's story. Perhaps we don't ask God for so many signs, that if we allow our faith to rise after he has confirmed his word, and then the next step would be obedience. The battle that Gideon was about to go into, you would need a lot of courage. You need a lot of faith because it was not an easy one. And as we move over to chapter 7, we see the battle against Midian. And I have to pause again to remind you of the oppression that the Midianites had put Israel under. Remember, they were a fierce people, right? They had no compassion, and their behavior showed that they were a force to be reckoned with. When they came to destroy all of the produce of Israel, it says that they came like locusts. There were so many of them. So Gideon going up against the Midianites was a no small feat. God has a plan. God has a strategy. Although he has 32,000 men, and although he has the confirmed word of the Lord that God is going to give him the victory, God wants him to have the victory by God alone. And so let's see what happens from verse 1. Then Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and all the people who were with him rose early and encamped beside the well of Harod, so that the camp of the Midianites was on the north side of them by the hill of Moreh in the valley. And the Lord said to Gideon, "The people who are with you are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hands, lest Israel claim glory for itself against me, saying, 'My own hand has saved me.' Now therefore proclaim in the hearing of the people, saying, 'Whoever is fearful and afraid, let him turn and depart at once from Mount Gilead.' And 22,000 of the people returned, and 10,000 remained." Let's look at a couple things in these few verses. Well, first of all, you may wonder, who is Jerubbaal? Well, that was a nickname that was given to Gideon based on what he had done previously by pulling down the altar of Baal. And the name or the nickname means a man against whom Baal is to strive and contend. And he's going with a 32,000 men strong army to go up against the Midianites that are very formidable. And God says, that's too much for me. All right. I'm not allowing you to go with so many people because I don't want Israel to take the glory for themselves. Now, 32,000 men was still not enough for the 135,000 Midianites they're about to face. But God had a strategy. We've seen him with the strategy with Joshua and Jericho. We've seen him with other strategies that make no sense to mankind, but make perfect sense to God. And so here he tells Gideon to invite all who were afraid to go home. And imagine that 22,000 leave, and he's left with only 10,000 men. So first, you're already outnumbered by your enemy, and now you're at the place that so many men are actually afraid to fight. That was the first test that God gave them. And then there was a second test. And God instructed Gideon to bring the men down to the water. And he said to them, whoever laps from the water with his tongue as a dog laps, you shall set apart by himself. Likewise, everyone who gets down on his knees to drink, and the number of those who lapped, putting their hand to their mouth, was 3,000 men. But all the rest of the people got down on their knees to drink water. So in this second test, the men had to go down to the water to drink. Those who, went and drank water, normally eyes down, enjoying the water, those were the ones who had to be separated to go home. It was those who put water in their hands and lapped like a dog, keeping their eyes on their surroundings, keeping their eyes on what's going on around them. Those were the ones who were fit for the battle. They got to remain. So God whittled down the army with the first test from 32,000 to 10,000. And then now with the second test, he's bringing it from 10,000 to 300. Okay. Wow. 300 from 32,000. 10,000 was apparently too much for God still. But 300 now is just right. All right. Now for us, we're like, God, you sure? Maybe I heard you wrong. This can't be it. Ready to rebuke the enemy, but this was God's strategy. God assured Gideon that they would have victory, but he wanted them to know that it was him who was doing it. This portion of the army was less than 1% of the original size. And when you do the math, it's about 400 Midianite soldiers to each Israeli soldier. Gideon had to trust in God. And the victory that they would get would only be a result of God's intervention. Now that he has an army of 300, Gideon sends spies into the camp of the Midianites, prompted by the word of the Lord. Because God says to him, arise and go down against the camp, for I have delivered it into your hand. But if you are afraid to go down to the camp with Purah your servant, and you shall hear what they say. And afterward your hands shall be strengthened to go down against the camp. So God is continuing to strengthen Gideon and to let him know that, hey, we're going to do this. This is what I have for you. And so Gideon does go down with his servant. And as he goes down, he actually gets encouraged that they're going to win this battle. From verse 13, there was a man telling a dream to his companion. So Gideon is overhearing this conversation. And the man says, I have had a dream. To my surprise, a loaf of barley bread tumbled into the camp of Midian. It came to a tent and struck it so that it fell and overturned, and the tent collapsed. Then his companion answered and said, this is nothing else but the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel. Into his hand God has delivered Midian and the whole camp. And so it was, when Gideon heard the telling of the dream and its interpretation, that he worshipped. He returned to the camp of Israel and said, arise, for the Lord has delivered the camp of Midian into your hand. So Gideon got what he needed. By overhearing this conversation in the camp of the enemy, he knew that they would have the victory. And so he goes back to his camp, tells everybody the message, and he divides the large army of 300 men into 3 companies, and he puts a trumpet in every man's hand, and they get empty pitchers and torches inside the pitchers, and he says to them, look at me and do likewise. Watch. And when I come to the edge of the camp, you shall do as I do. When I blow the trumpet, I and all who are with me, then you also blow the trumpets on every side of the whole camp, and say, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. Now, he is mounting a surprise attack against the Midianites. So Gideon goes down to the camp of the Midianites with 100 men. So that's only 1/3 of the camp. And everybody is going to encamp around the camp with their trumpets and their pitchers. And it's the middle of the night, okay? So all of the Midianites, they're sleeping, and the Israelite army is ready to surprise them. And so Gideon blows the trumpet, he breaks the pitcher, everybody sees what he does, they do it as well, and there is this loud noise. And what happens? The enemy wakes up confused. They hear the noise, they hear the screaming, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon, and the whole army runs out and they flee because they think that they are surrounded by such a large army. There is the noise, there is the light, there are all these things coming to them from every direction. This was a strategy that God gave to Gideon. Because of the noise and how they were startled out of their sleep, the Midianites actually start to fight themselves. They don't know which one is enemy, which one is friend. And they begin to fight and kill one another. And then Gideon sends messengers through all the mountains of Ephraim saying, come down against the Midianites and seize from them the watering places as far as Beth-barah and the Jordan. So listen, they are coming in. The Israelites are coming in, and they are defeating the Midianites. They are pursuing the Midianites, and God is blessing the effort. God is with them and gives them good success against the enemy and against all the leaders of the Midianites.